Welcome back. In our last segment, we heard from former New York City top cop Ray Kelly, who talked exclusively to Dominic Carter about community policing and what he deemed to be the mishandling of the investigation surrounding Michael Brown's death in Ferguson, Missouri. And Kelly also went on to talk exclusively with Dominic about this weekend's protest on Staten Island.
Switch gears. As you know, a big protest here in New York, in Staten Island over the weekend. I was amazed. The NYPD showed how to handle a demonstration. Lots of community affairs officers out there, no riot gear, no arrests, no injuries. Explain to me, well, one, how do you feel about the fact that none of the negative things went on as it relates to the NYPD?
Well, obviously, it has a lot to do with the people who were demonstrating. They're the ones who decided, ultimately, they didn't want to have a sort of confrontations or do anything that could have been determined to be against the law. So they're the ones to be commended. Now, the NYPD has an awful lot of experience in handling demonstrations. More demonstrations here than any other city in America, more than in Washington. Every year from 60th Street South, just in Manhattan alone, there are about 600 demonstrations, we'll call it. In front of the UN, there are demonstrations every day. So the department has a lot of experience in handling demonstrations, and as you said, the community affairs officers were actively involved. But I think credit has to go to the demonstrators. They're the ones who ultimately make the decision as to the tenor of the of the demonstration. At least here in New York, that's the case.
Commissioner, I want you to respond to an article that has received a lot of attention on the internet, and it's apparently written by a former police officer, a 17-year veteran of the LAPD, the Los Angeles Police Department, in which he says his thesis, if you will, is that it's not the police, but the people they stop who can prevent a detention from turning into a tragedy. Now, he says, basically, I'm a cop, and if you don't want to get hurt, don't challenge me. And I want to put this up on the screen for the folks watching us right now, in which he says, quote, well, he says cops are not murderers. No officer goes out in the field wishing to shoot anyone, armed or unarmed. And he says, quote, don't argue with me. Don't call me names. Don't tell me that I can't stop you. Don't say I'm a racist pig. Don't threaten you'll sue me and take away my badge. Don't scream at me that you pay my salary. And don't even think of aggressively walking towards me. Your reaction?
Well, that might be his wish list, but that's not the way the world works, and not the way that it works in this country. You know, a lot of people voice their displeasure at the police, and if you don't like it, hey, get another job. Obviously, if it turns into something physical or it breaks the law, then police are going to take action. But that comes with the territory, and anybody who doesn't think so is deluding themselves. Now, you are familiar with advancing community trust. We would have all of the recruits graduating from the police academy in the Apollo Theater. And we would have Reverend Sharpton, and you would monitor this event. We'd have Reverend Daughtry and the people who
strong critics of the police department.
Strong critics of the police department who would tell them directly up front, this is their experiences, this is what they think should change, that sort of thing. So right from the get-go, they're knowing that everybody is not going to be totally satisfied with what they do. So you have to expect that give and take in the street. People are just not going to totally acquiesce. It'd be nice if they did for the police officers, but that's not the nature of the job.
Commissioner, you just alluded to this, and let's discuss this for a second. It's amazing to me, only a year ago, roughly, you had approval numbers in the black community, the African-American community, I think of what, 70%, 75%? What were they?
Well, it was 75% overall, but I think in the African-American community, it was in the upper 50s.
Now,
63%, I'm sorry.
Okay, 63%. We hear a lot about mistrust and a bad relationship between communities of color and NYPD. Explain to me, how were you able to get through?
Well, I think in that same poll, the police department had a 70% approval rating. So it undermines totally the false narrative, in my opinion, that was put out during the last mayoral campaign, that there was this huge schism between minorities and the police, particularly the African American community and the police. This belies that. It just simply was not the case, but it worked for the election because it was a very low turnout, and they're able to parse the electorate and go to, you might say, the edges, the extremes, if you will, to a certain extent. And that's where that sort of vote was cultivated. But again, in my opinion, it just is not based on fact. It was indeed a false narrative. And we've worked hard, the department has worked hard for many years to build up trust in the community. By nature of the job, you're always going to have some friction someplace. Police arrest people, they're the bearers of bad news, they use force, they sometimes, as we saw so unfortunately in Ferguson, they use deadly force sometimes. Having said all of that, the numbers were high as far as the approval rating of what the police are doing in New York City and in the communities of color. I think part of that is a result of the moving in the right direction in terms of having the department reflect the community that it serves. New York is the most diverse city in the world. We have now in our city the most diverse police department in the world. Our police officer rank is majority minority. It went there in 2006, and it certainly remains there. New York City police officers are born in 106 countries, which is an amazing figure. No other police department in the world could come close to that. So there are a lot of unwritten stories or untold stories here in New York, but it doesn't fit a template, doesn't fit a particular narrative, so you don't hear it. There's only so many ways to get these stories out. We have a narrowing number of newspapers or media channels to get your stories out. You can't get it out that way. The public, generally speaking, you're not going to hear it.
Commissioner, you mentioned the Apollo Theater, and also part of this was the fact, and I recall it like it was yesterday, you were in Africa without the cameras. As commissioner, you were in African American churches, it seemed like, and Latino churches, it seemed like almost every Sunday. But you mentioned the Apollo, and I remember you reached out one day and you said, I want you to moderate this, come speak to the class of 1,000 police officers, brand new police officers. And I expected to, be a bit diplomatic, and you said, oh no, say exactly how you feel about police community relations. It's a bit odd, it seems a bit odd, but why did you do that? Why did you do those types of events?
Well, we wanted recruits they had gone through the police academy for 6 months and received a lot of training in the classroom. We wanted to have a dose of reality and say, here's what leaders, opinion formers, in the community, in communities of color, think about their interactions with the police in the past, what they think the state of relations is now, and what their recommendations are to improve it. It was sort of a cold shower, if you will, to let them get a sense of what's out there on the street and be at least sensitive to the fact that these issues exist.
Dominic's exclusive interview with former NYPD Commissioner Ray Kelly continues tomorrow night. He's going to talk about stop and frisk, among other things. Dominic, you've interviewed Ray Kelly countless times. Mm-hmm. He surprised you with some of the things he said today.
He sure did. I know he's a strong supporter of the police, as you would expect him to be, Andrew. I didn't expect him to be as critical as he was of the Missouri authorities. He tried to sugarcoat it to a degree, but he criticized them on a number of fronts.
Great job with the interview. We'll see you again tomorrow night, Dom. Thanks very much. Up next, a young Missouri teenager decides to become a protester and learn some life lessons in the process. His story in his own words next.